Chris was an 11-year-old Boy Scout in New Jersey when he says his life became consumed with a dark secret. "You do everything you can to block it out of your mind," he said. Chris, whose last name Nightline is withholding at his request, says his Boy Scout troop leader, Stephen Corcoran, sexually abused him hundreds of times over 5 years, from the time he was 11 until he was 16. "I couldn't even tell you every location it happened in," Chris said. It became that normal." Watch the full story on Nightline tonight at 12:35 a.m. ET. Chris claims Corcoran began paying special attention to him as soon as he joined the troop and eventually became a trusted family friend. But along the way, according to Chris, things took a sickening turn. Weeks after he hit puberty, Chris said Corcoran took him over to his apartment before one of their troop meetings and said, "Hey, I got some beer in the fridge for you. Help yourself." Then he breaks out a stash of porn, Chris said. Then one thing led to another, but at that point, I was 11 and essentially intoxicated, not knowing what to do, what was happening to my body. I was literally frozen, he continued. I just couldn't move. Chris, now an adult, said he is finally sharing his story publicly, 2 decades later. His adulthood, he said, is plagued by depression, anxiety and anger. "I've had this kind of whirlwind of mess throughout my adult life," he said. "I'm still dealing with this, like it happened yesterday." Chris, along with 2 other former Boy Scouts who also allege Corcoran abused them, have filed a lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America, saying the organization did not do enough to prevent the sexual abuse. "Who's the only guy in the troop without a kid there, and then look at his interaction with the kids," Chris said. "If you knew there was a problem like this and someone was down there with knowledge of what grooming looks like, you're going to spot it in 5 minutes." They chose not to do this. Chris said there was no escaping the abuse and eventually, he said, he was spending hours at a time with Corcoran. The abuse, he said, even continued on troop outings, including a group ski trip. Chris has a photo from that trip that shows an unidentified adult man in his underwater sitting next to him. "Those are his boxers," Chris said, pointing to the man in the photo. "So at what point does someone say, hey, there's a problem here? How does someone not realize that there's an issue?" He said Corcoran openly provided young scouts with alcohol, adding that on some of their away trips, he literally turned it into a booze fest. In one instance, Chris said an adult friend of Corcoran's allegedly witnessed the sexual abuse, catching him and Corcoran together, and confronted Corcoran about it. "Steve told me he played it off," Chris said. He said, "You need to be more careful in the future," and that friend just disappeared out of the troop. He didn't like to do what normal people would do and call the police. Chris said the abuse finally ended when he was 16 years old, but by then, his former scout leader had become a family friend and was even a guest at his wedding. "I can't believe the guy made it at my wedding," Chris said. "Unfortunately, I originally left them off the list for the wedding, and my wife asked me, 'What about him?' And I remember I didn't have an answer to say no. Like how could I? At the time I couldn't justify saying no without telling the truth." Chris's wife Tina said she had no idea the pain Chris said he suffered as a child and that Chris opened up to her about it when they were almost 6 years into their marriage. He said, "Steve abused me, and that was it," Tina said. "It was like a one statement, Steve abused me. I mean I had no clue, no earthly idea." After he told her, Tina said she then started to notice the pain on Chris's face in their wedding photos taken with Corcoran. Chris said he also finally confided in his attorney at the time. "I broke down in absolute tears and I just told him," he said. "I told him exactly what happened." In a statement to ABC News, the Boy Scouts of America said the organization is outraged. "There have been times when scouts were abused and we sincerely apologize to victims and their families. In the many years since these alleged actions occurred, we have continued to evaluate and strengthen our efforts to protect youth." Attorney Bruce Nagel, who represents Chris in his civil suit against the organization, said they hope their lawsuit will bring to light that this is an epidemic throughout the United States. People need to be educated that there is sexual abuse going on through the United States in the Boy Scouts, Nagel added. Corcoran's attorney maintains that his client is innocent of the abuse allegations. But in a separate case, Corcoran, now 49, was found guilty of possession of child pornography. In June, he was sentenced to 7 years